Like me, you were raised by a single mother. You lacked the guidance and presence of your father during your formative years. Or if your father was around but set a negative example, you still lack direction on how a man should think and act. Be you one of the few men who actually had someone play the role of a mentor, whether that be a sports coach, a teacher, a manager at work, or someone in the military. However, for most of us, we've been going about our lives without the presence of a male role model. And this is quite a recent phenomenon. 3, 4 generations ago, a boy would become his father's apprentice, work in the fields with him all day, or learning his father's trade. And he'd be amongst other men doing the same, men working with a real sense of responsibility to provide for their families, and with a grip strength that could break your hand from the high levels of testosterone that men had 100, 50, even 20 years ago. Nowadays, the men that you actually meet in life whom you admire and respect are so few and far between. This exercise with me. I want you to think about 10 random men that you might see walking down the street in your area. Just 10 typical men that you might walk past on a daily basis. How many of those would you look at and think to yourself, wow, they're powerful, put together, they look successful? How many of those would you respect? And the answer for most of us is probably zero. Even in the more affluent areas, the vast majority are these men that you would have no respect for. Maybe you have a teacher, a coach, or a boss at work whom you do admire and respect and who is successful. But the vast majority of men these days, let's be honest, are living semi depressed lives, mediocre existences, maybe with a drinking problem, just stumbling about their existence with no clear goals. Why is there such a shortage of male role models? One reason is the breakup of the family. This one is obvious and probably the case for most of us in this community. A boy with divorced parents, even with regular visitation by your father, you don't get anywhere near the amount of time that's needed to actually establish a connection with him and receive that mentorship. I remember when my parents got divorced when I was 4 years old, that I would see my father for a weekend every 2 weeks. And that was nowhere near enough time to actually get to know him well and for him to be really involved in what was going on in my life. And as a result, about 99% of the traits that I developed during childhood came from my mother. And you probably experienced a similar thing. Second reason is pop culture and the media. The social agenda promoting the more extreme forms of feminism and the message that traditional masculinity is toxic. We've seen a lot of male figures in both the physical and the online space being cancelled and slandered for their message, Andrew Tate being the most famous. Even beyond Tate, there's so many male content creators who've been banned on different social platforms. I need to highlight that you don't need to agree with every single thing that someone says, and by all means, you should apply a mental filter when distilling any message that you receive from anyone. But the solution isn't to suppress these people. For example, a lot of effort has been invested into calling Andrew Tate a misogynist and toxic, but I wish more effort had been invested in understanding the real cause of why he blew up in the first place. Him becoming so big is a symptom of the lack of guidance that young men are experiencing, this void of male role models, and then starting discussions on how we as a society can come up with ways to alleviate that. Very disappointing that no effort has been put into that. The third reason is that the men we're supposed to look up to lead empty lives. Our father's generation are having it bad on average. Most men lead this shell of an existence, sitting in traffic every day to reach a job that they have no passion for, sitting in a cubicle for 8 hours, snacking on the sugary office treats, growing a belly, in traffic on the way home, maybe stopping by the shop to pick up something that their wife is nagging them to get, going home to his kids who are absorbed in their screens and don't even acknowledge his existence. His wife doesn't even give him a kiss or smile at him and just makes a comment about another bill that's due that she had already reminded him to deal with. Going to bed and having another sexless night, only to wake up and do it again. I've just described the reality for 80, 90% of men. Of course, they're not going to have the zest for life to become exceptional and become someone who we actually look up to. Lastly, I think there's an issue with the lack of visibility. While it's true that most men lead empty lives and are uninspiring, there are still men out there who are hardworking, disciplined, have morals, and look after their family. The problem is that as a society, we're not celebrating these men. How many times have you seen in the news a story about a firefighter who saved someone from a burning building? Or about how a father defending his children from a pedophile? Or someone doing a good deed in the local community? The news system is instead filled with scandalous stories about this celebrity and that rapper and political propaganda that is very good for attracting people's attention and making money for these media companies. We praise wives and mothers for looking after their family while being successful career women, and children thank her for making dinner. But how often do we praise a man for covering the rent or paying off the electricity bill, or for risking his life to build a skyscraper, or ruining his lungs by working in the coal mines so that we can heat our homes? Because make no mistake, the vast majority of jobs that have the highest risk of death and disease are still being done by men. Of course, I'm not saying that this is women's fault, and I do think that it's great that we give them the credit that they indeed deserve. But we can also give some praise to men who often go unnoticed or whose efforts are taken for granted, because praise and respect are what we truly seek deep down. And those things will motivate us to become better and do more and to become role models for the next generation. What you can do right now is put yourself in environments where you're more likely to meet these exceptional men, whether that's in education, if you're currently studying, by applying to a top school, or applying to the best firms in your profession if you're already in your career, or if business is your passion, then moving to a city like Dubai or London or somewhere in America where there's a concentration of entrepreneurs. So many networking events and online communities that you can join where you're more likely to meet other like-minded men. And finally, make a pact with yourself to become the role model that you wish you had. If you have a younger brother or someone who's a few years younger than you, take him under your wing and become his mentor. Teach him the things that you wish you knew when you're in his position. In the long term, you'll want to be the role model for your children. And that's a goal that I have in mind as I go.